Every map has a legend, a key that tells you what the symbols mean, what the colors represent, where the borders are drawn. Most people look at a map and trust it completely. But what if the map you've been given is missing entire territories? The map of World War II that most of us carry in our heads has clear markings. 1939, Hitler invades Poland. The war begins. The Allies fight back. The good side wins. The end. It's a clean map, easy to read, reassuring in its simplicity. But there is a vast, unmapped territory behind that story, a hidden geography of debt, capital, and corporate deals that most historians draw only in the faintest lines or leave off the map entirely. Today, we are going to chart that territory because the real origins of the deadliest conflict in human history were not drawn by generals. They were written in balance sheets, signed in bank offices, negotiated in boardrooms thousands of miles from the trenches. And the trail, if you're willing to follow it, leads somewhere deeply uncomfortable. Welcome to the Lost Atlas. I'm your guide, and today we're going to navigate the financial architecture that built World War II, step by step, from the ruins of one war to the fires of the next. Let's find what's missing from the map. Our journey begins not in 1939, not even in 1933, when Hitler took power. It begins in June 1919, in a gilded hall outside Paris, where the victors of the Great War gathered to draw the new map of Europe. What they drew was a trap. The Treaty of Versailles forced Germany to accept sole legal and moral responsibility for the entire war under Article 231, the infamous War Guilt Clause. This wasn't symbolic. It was the legal foundation for something far more consequential: reparations. The bill arrived in 1921, 132 billion gold marks, adjusted to today's values, somewhere around $400 billion, for a country that had just lost a war. And that was only the financial wound. Germany also lost 13% of its territory, 12% of its population, 48% of its iron production capacity, significant coal reserves. Its military was reduced to 100,000 soldiers, its navy capped at 15,000 sailors, stripped of its submarine fleet. John Maynard Keynes, one of the 20th century's greatest economic minds, sat inside the British delegation at Versailles and watched in horror. He quit. He returned to England and wrote The Economic Consequences of the Peace, one of the most prophetic books of the century. Keynes called it a Carthaginian peace. Rome didn't just defeat Carthage. Rome salted the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. That, Keynes argued, was what the Allies were doing to Germany. He warned that the reparations were many times more than Germany could ever realistically pay, and that demanding them would produce catastrophic instability across the continent. His final warning: if we aim deliberately at the impoverishment of Central Europe, vengeance, I dare predict, will not limp. Nobody listened. The map was drawn, and it was drawn with a flaw built into its very foundation. Here is where the map gets strange. Germany couldn't pay. This should have surprised no one. By 1923, the German economy had disintegrated into hyperinflation so severe the exchange rate reached 4.2 trillion marks to $1. Citizens carried cash in wheelbarrows, not because they were wealthy, but because a wheelbarrow of banknotes might purchase a single loaf of bread. When Germany defaulted on timber and coal deliveries in 1923, France and Belgium sent troops into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial core, to physically extract the resources. German workers struck in protest. The government printed more money to support them. The spiral accelerated. Europe teetered on the edge of total financial collapse. Into this void stepped the United States. Not with soldiers, with something far more powerful: capital. In 1924, an American banker named Charles G. Dawes chaired an international committee tasked with solving the crisis. The Dawes Plan was celebrated as a triumph of diplomacy. Dawes received the Nobel Peace Prize. Champagne was poured. Hands were shaken across polished tables. Here is what the Dawes Plan actually built. It restructured German reparations into manageable installments, but more critically, it opened Germany to a flood of American investment. Wall Street floated an 800 million Reichsmark loan to stabilize the German currency. J.P. Morgan led the offering. American investors, fat with cash in the roaring 20s, oversubscribed it immediately. The loans kept coming. By 1929, estimates suggest American capital flowing into Germany under the Dawes Plan and its successor, the Young Plan, exceeded $3 billion. And now pay attention, because this is the hidden geography that almost nobody marks on the map. American banks lent money to Germany. Germany used that money to pay reparations to France and Britain. France and Britain used those reparation payments to service their war debts back to the United States. The money left America, circled through Europe, and returned to America. Everyone appeared to benefit. American investors earned interest. Germany stabilized. France and Britain received their payments. German unemployment fell. Industrial production surged. The Weimar Republic looked, for a moment, like it might actually survive. But the entire system rested on a single assumption, that American credit would never stop flowing. On October 24th, 1929, that assumption died. Black Thursday, the Wall Street crash, American banks failed. And when American banks failed, they called in their foreign loans instantly. The river of capital that had been sustaining Germany for 5 years dried up overnight. Between 1929 and 1932, German industrial production fell by roughly 40%. Unemployment exploded from 1.4 million to over 6 million. 1 in 3 German workers had no job. Wages collapsed by 39%. Banks shuttered. Businesses closed. People did not just lose savings, they lost everything they had built since the last catastrophe. The Weimar government's response accelerated the disaster. Terrified of triggering another bout of hyperinflation, Chancellor Brüning imposed austerity, cut government spending, cut wages. At the precise moment the economy required stimulus, the government applied the brakes with full force. It was economic malpractice on a civilizational scale. And into that devastation walked Adolf Hitler. In 1928, the Nazi Party had captured 2.6% of the vote. They were dismissed as fringe extremists, a noisy minority with violent rhetoric and no serious political future. The Depression rewrote that calculation. By September 1930, with unemployment tearing through German cities, the Nazis surged to 18.3%. Suddenly, the second largest party in the Reichstag. By July 1932, they held 37%. The trajectory was vertical. A 2019 study from the Center for Economic Policy Research mapped this connection with remarkable precision. Cities more exposed to failing German banks showed dramatically higher Nazi voting. When the Danit Bank and Dresdner Bank collapsed in 1931, the political landscape transformed almost immediately. The researchers found that a 1 standard deviation decline in income caused by bank failures was directly associated with a 4.3% rise in Nazi support. But the mechanism wasn't purely economic. Even controlling for financial fundamentals, exposure to bank failures increased Nazi voting through psychological channels. The trauma of watching institutions collapse, the vertigo of uncertainty, the desperate human need for someone to blame and someone to follow. Hitler supplied both with devastating precision. He blamed the Treaty of Versailles. He blamed the communists. He blamed the bankers, specifically Jewish bankers, for Germany's humiliation. He promised jobs. He promised restoration. He promised that Germany would rise again from beneath the boot of its creditors and enemies. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, not through an outright electoral victory, not through a coup, but through a backroom deal among conservative politicians who were certain they could use and then discard him. They were among the most consequentially wrong people in history. Here is the territory that most maps leave blank. Because Hitler did not rebuild Germany's military machine alone. He had partners, And some of those partners were American corporations whose names you know, brands that still exist today. In October 1936, U.S. Ambassador to Germany William Dodd wrote a letter directly to President Franklin Roosevelt. His finding: more than 100 American corporations maintained subsidiaries or cooperative arrangements with Nazi Germany. Let us chart them one by one. Ford. Henry Ford was not merely a businessman operating in Germany. He was a committed anti-Semite whose writings directly influenced Hitler. Ford's newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, published a series of articles alleging a Jewish conspiracy to control the United States. These were compiled into volumes called The International Jew and distributed internationally. Hitler read them in German translation. He kept Ford's portrait on the wall of his Munich office. In Mein Kampf, Hitler praised Henry Ford by name. In July 1938, the Nazi regime awarded Ford the Order of the German Eagle, first class, the highest honor Germany could bestow on a foreign national. Ford accepted the medal. Ford's German subsidiary, Ford Werke in Cologne, ran continuously throughout the Nazi period. The plant completed military truck construction in time for Hitler's 1939 invasion of Czechoslovakia. Between 1942 and 1944, the same factory produced approximately 10,000 half-tracks for the German army. By 1942, roughly one-third of the Wehrmacht's 350,000 operational trucks had been manufactured at Ford facilities inside the Reich. A U.S. Army investigation report, dated September 5, 1945, directly accused Ford's German operation of serving as an arsenal of Nazism, with the knowledge and consent of the parent company in Dearborn, Michigan. General Motors. GM's Opel division was Germany's largest automobile manufacturer. Together, Ford and GM's German operations controlled 70% of the German auto market when war began in 1939. Both companies rapidly retooled their production lines to supply military vehicles. Their trucks moved troops into Poland. Their engines pushed the advance into France. Their logistics carried the invasion east toward Moscow. GM's chief executive James Mooney was an open admirer of Adolf Hitler. He too received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle. IBM. This is perhaps the most disturbing coordinate on the entire map. The Nazi regime made systematic use of Hollerith punch card machines, produced by IBM's German subsidiary De Homag. These machines were not used for routine accounting. They were deployed in the Nazi census operations that identified Jews and other targeted populations for persecution. Edwin Black documented this in exhaustive detail in his book, IBM and the Holocaust. IBM's technology was operational inside concentration camps. Each camp maintained a dedicated Hollerith department. SS personnel received training from IBM technicians. The machines tracked prisoners, cataloged their movements, managed the logistics of industrial-scale murder with mechanical precision. IBM has contested specific interpretations of the evidence. The company has not denied the fundamental findings. It has donated substantially to Holocaust memorial organizations. The map speaks for itself. Standard Oil of New Jersey maintained a deep working relationship with IG Farben, the German chemical conglomerate. By 1933, Standard Oil had transferred $2 million to Nazi Germany and was earning $500,000 annually helping Germany develop synthetic fuel, a resource the German military absolutely required to function. IG Farben would later produce Zyklon B, the poison gas used in the extermination camps. IG Farben operated factories at Auschwitz, using slave labor. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, American corporate investments in Nazi Germany totaled more than $450 million. The list of companies involved extends well beyond the four named above: International Telephone and Telegraph, Eastman Kodak, Singer, International Harvester, Gillette, Coca-Cola, Westinghouse, United Fruit Company. Some operated in Germany throughout the war. Some used slave labor. Some held their German profits in escrow, waiting for the conflict to end, then collected them in full. And after the war, The United States government paid General Motors compensation for damage that Allied bombers had inflicted on their German factories. Sit with that for a moment. So, how did Hitler actually finance the military machine? Where did the Reichsmarks come from? The architect was Hjalmar Schacht, appointed Reichsbank president in 1933 and Minister of Economics in 1934. Schacht was not a Nazi ideologue. He was a financial engineer of exceptional ability and exceptional moral flexibility. He invented a deficit financing mechanism using promissory notes called Mefo bills. These were essentially government IOUs circulated through a shell company, used to pay for military equipment without the expenditure appearing in official budgets. It was creative accounting in service of rearmament, and it concealed the scale of German military spending from international observers for years. The results were visible and dramatic. German unemployment, which had stood near 30% when Hitler took power, had practically vanished by 1938. Industrial production soared. The German people, who had endured hyperinflation, depression, and mass unemployment within the span of 15 years, experienced something that felt like an economic resurrection. But the miracle rested on a lie. By 1938, the Mefo system was fracturing under its own weight. The government was forcing banks to purchase government bonds, raiding savings accounts, stripping capital from insurance companies to keep the scheme operational. And here is the truth at the center of the Nazi economy that is rarely marked clearly on any map. The model was structurally incapable of surviving without external conquest. Germany lacked the oil, the iron, the agricultural land it needed. Hitler's concept of Lebensraum, living space in the East, was not merely racial ideology. It was an economic extraction plan built into the foundation of the regime's finances. Without conquest, the Reich would collapse under its own debt. War was not a failure. War was the only viable business model the Nazi economy possessed. Let's be direct about what conventional history gets wrong. It underestimates the economic origins of the catastrophe. The Treaty of Versailles was not just politically punitive. It constructed a financial architecture. Reparations, circular loans, fragile capital flows. That was inherently unstable. When that architecture collapsed in 1929, it did not merely cause a depression. It destroyed the economic conditions that democracy requires to function. It treats Hitler's rise as historically inevitable, as though fascism was latent in the German national character, waiting to emerge. The data does not support this. In 1928, Nazis held 2.6% of the vote. Without the depression, without the banking collapses, the mass unemployment, the catastrophic wage cuts, the Nazi Party very likely remains a fringe movement, complaining at the margins of German political life. Economic devastation paved the road. Financial crisis handed Hitler the keys. It minimizes the role of international capital. The Dawes Plan was a Nobel Prize-winning achievement that pumped billions into Germany without building any sustainable economic foundation. When the credit stopped, the catastrophe followed. American capital did not simply fail to prevent fascism. In certain structural ways, it helped engineer the conditions from which fascism grew. And it treats American corporate collaboration with the Nazi regime as a footnote rather than a central chapter. Ford, GM, IBM, Standard Oil. These were not obscure peripheral actors. These were the defining corporations of American industrial capitalism. Their executives collected Nazi medals. Their technology tracked victims. Their factories produced weapons. And after the war, the overwhelming majority faced no meaningful consequences. This is not conjecture, not revisionism, not a conspiracy theory drawn on a discredited map. This is documented in Nuremberg trial records, in congressional investigation files, in U.S. Army reports, in academic archives that historians have had access to for decades. The coordinates have always been there. Most maps simply choose not to mark them. The Lost Atlas exists because the most important territories are often the ones left unmapped. And this particular territory, the financial geography of how World War II was built, matters now more than it ever has, because the forces that assembled that catastrophe have not been retired to history. Economic instability still generates political extremism. Financial crises still erode democratic institutions. Corporations still conduct business with authoritarian regimes under the banner of pragmatism. The connections between capital, power, and catastrophe are still buried under complexity that most people never bother to navigate. The standard lesson of World War II is valuable but incomplete. Watch for dictators. Defend democracy. Never forget, the deeper lesson, the one drawn on the hidden map, is this. Catastrophes of this scale do not arrive without warning. They are assembled over decades through thousands of individual decisions, most of which appear entirely reasonable in isolation. A peace treaty intended to prevent future war. Loans designed to stabilize a struggling economy. Business relationships that generate legitimate profits and create real jobs. Each step makes sense. Together, they build an inferno. Keynes saw it in 1919 from inside the room where the trap was being set. He wrote, "Vengeance, I dare predict, will not limp." He was right. Vengeance came at a cost of 60 million lives. And the economic structures that made it possible were constructed in large part by the same nations that would spend the following decade fighting to dismantle them. That is the lost atlas of World War II. Not a story only of armies and battles, heroes and monsters, though it is that too. It is a story of debt that could not be paid, of capital that followed profit without asking where the road led, of economic systems that manufactured political catastrophe, of corporations that did business with that catastrophe long after the warning signs had become impossible to ignore. The map has always existed. Most people simply were never shown it. We chart it here because understanding where we have been is the only honest way to navigate where we are going. If you want to keep exploring the territories that official history leaves unmapped, the financial forces, the hidden power structures, the economic undercurrents that shape the world we live in, then subscribe to the Lost Atlas. Every video is a new coordinate. Every story is a piece of the map most people never see. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you at the next destination.